Hey everybody, welcome back. So this is part two of the Google Cloud Shell kind of intro slash demo video. Last time, if you remember, we basically got started with Cloud Shell. I showed you how to activate it, and kind of a getting started with the gcloud command. Obviously, there is a ton more that we can be doing with it, so don't worry, you'll get used to it over time. But what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how we can use the Cloud Shell to do something interesting. And I thought, what's more interesting than sifting through big data using just the terminal environment? So what I've got here is a code lab on the left for working with BigQuery, which is Google's basically, it's an SQL variant for sifting through massive piles of data. So think terabytes and zettabytes, just massive amounts of information. It's actually really, really neat environment. On the right here, again, I've got my cloud environment, so I've got Cloud Shell already open. If you forgot how to do that, it's this little icon up here that looks like a terminal environment. And I get my Cloud Shell right here. So I'm basically just going to work through this code lab with you. I would honestly recommend you guys all try it out as well. It is kind of a nifty little demo about getting up and running with BigQuery. We'll be talking about big data later on, but for now, let's focus on the gcloud side of things. So first things first, we have to get set up. So I need to enable BigQuery. So this is one thing that we haven't really done too much yet. We have to actually enable the API. So I'm actually going to close my Cloud Console here for a moment. I need to enable BigQuery. So I'm going to go to BigQuery. So I just searched for it. I typed in BigQuery. And here I see the BigQuery environment. Now I should already have it enabled because I've done things in BigQuery before. You need to actually enable this API to use it. So you're going to see a little pop-up here that says enable BigQuery for your account. Yes or no, you're going to click yes, and now you have access to this API, right? So other things, so let's go back to our Cloud Shell. And I'm going to make this a bit bigger because we don't really care about anything up here right now. Again, make sure that you are signed into the correct account. Make sure that you are assigned to the correct project. Go back to the last video and check that if you want to look up how to do that. But it should be your CIS680 project that you've created, right? So first things first. Okay, so this is all making sure the project ID is okay. So I'm looking at the code lab here and saying, okay, yes, I'm in the correct project. Again, I see correct project right there. Not as big of a deal for you all in class because you probably only have one project. If you're using this in a company setting, you're probably going to have lots of projects, lots of billing accounts. This is where it's important to make sure you're in the correct one. Okay, so what we have to do now is we have to create a data set. So we're going to use BigQuery to sift through information. So a data set for BigQuery is a collection of tables. Let's create those tables. Now we're going to use, we're not actually going to use gcloud yet. We're going to use something called BQ. So this is a command for BigQuery. So if I did BQ help, scroll back up here to where we can see it, Python script for interacting with BigQuery. All right, so that's what this is. BQ, MK, BQ load codelab. So what this is going to do, it's basically going to make a data set called BQ load codelab. Right, so it's not going to be in here. It's just a data set in BigQuery that we have. Now, if I want to see the properties of this data set, I'm going to keep using this BQ command, show BQ load codelab. And here I see when it was modified, I see who owns it, I see who has access to read and write from it. It's just me that has ownership access. If I wanted, I could assign all of you access to read and write. But those are the properties that we have for this code lab. Now we have to actually add some information to that code lab, and this is where we start adding things ourselves manually. So we basically created the shell for it, and now we're going to populate it with data, and it's just going to be a little bit of data. So in the code lab here, it says touch, edit, and then copy and paste. This is where you're basically just creating an empty file, opening it up in an editor, and then adding data. You can use Cloud Shell Edit, which pops open a nice little notepad style editor. If you're like me, there's Vim, which I prefer. You can use Nano, or pretty sure Emacs is available. Emacs? Yep, Emacs is available too. God, I have no idea how to get out of Emacs. Control C. Okay. Wow. Control C. Control X. Oh my god. Buffer's redoing. Control X. Control C. Okay. That was fun. Vim user trying to get out of Emacs. I'm gonna leave that in just because it's relevant. Okay, so let's run through this. Touch customer transactions .csv. Touch creates an empty file. So if I do ls, I will see that file right here. Okay. Now I'm going to use their commands first. So Cloud Shell, edit, customer, and I'm going to hit tab to autocomplete. We get this nice little Cloud Shell editor built with Eclipse. Basically, it's just a little notepad style environment. So I'm going to copy and paste this data just so that we have it available. Nice thing about this Cloud Shell editor, you also see your directory as well. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. Really? Okay. All right, so we have that. File, save, and I want to close this now. So I'm going to click Open Terminal to go back to the terminal. But what we see here is basically an ID, a zip code, timestamp, amount, feedback, SKU, and then just some comma-separated data. Not super important, but this is like transaction data. Right, so let's go back to our terminal. Again, I could also edit this with Vim if I'd prefer, which I would, but for you all, I'm going to show you Cloud Shell. Okay, so we have a CSV file. We have our shell. Now let's go ahead and load that in. So I'm just going to copy and paste this command because it looks long and probably very easy to screw up. If you're not familiar, the backslash here basically just allows you to have multi-line commands entered in. But what are we doing here? We're going to say this is a comma-separated value. We want to skip the title. We want to load the customer transactions into this shell that we created before, and then here's the format. So the ID is a string, the zip's a string, the time's a timestamp, so on and so forth. So let's put that in there. You see these little right arrows pop up. That just means the command is being continued. So I'm going to hit enter, and then it should load that into our BigQuery environment. So you see waiting on job, up, current status done. We now have data loaded in. Now, I'm going to clear this. I want to see this table, right? I want to see this data set. So BQ show, BQ load codelab dot customer transactions. So here I actually see my table. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see it all in one slide. Almost all in one. There we go. So when was it modified? What is our schema? Schema is a database thing for how are the columns laid out, how many rows, how many bytes, other information which we haven't added yet, but is available to us if we want it. And I get you to come back here. There, it's like running really slow for some reason. So we see our database schema, which is good. So we have loaded it correctly. Okay, now let's do a query. So consider this to be like a standard SQL call. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste this because very easy to screw up a long command like this. But what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, BigQuery, I want to run a query. This no-use legacy SQL, basically, I mentioned before that BigQuery is like a variant of SQL. So that's your database query language, standard query language. But if you have the legacy SQL tag, you can use the normal SQL commands. Otherwise, you use the BigQuery specific commands. So here, basically what I want to get is I want to join the data set with the zip code US zip codes data set, and sum up the transactions by state is kind of what the purpose of this query is. Now what you're seeing here, which is interesting, at least to me, is that you are actually reaching out to another data set to query it. And that is a publicly available zip codes classic UI. Okay, of course. Basically, while that loads, there are a bunch of publicly accessible data sets out there which you can play with in query. Like there's the COVID-19 data set, there's the US zip codes, there is a list of everybody's name, there's the entire GitHub uh, repositories, commits, files, all of that has been indexed in BigQuery. But I'm losing where I was at here with the zip code. But if you kind of open up some of the public data, we see a whole list of tables like, again, COVID-19 data. We see genomics data, geographic data. Not sure why. Yeah, it's not going to let me go right to it. But basically, I'm querying against that data set, right? So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. Valid header value. Is it not like the fact that it's changed? Interesting. Yep. Okay, so this is honestly where I said that things can go a little bit wonky with older codelabs. So this is actually a Python error, invalid header value. So I'm gonna have to look into this. That's interesting. Let's try typing this out really quickly. BigQuery, no use legacy SQL. I'm just curious if there's like a weird copy paste error. Dot load codelab customer transactions. Utility. Okay, yeah, so it was just a copy paste error. So where I said copy paste, apparently BigQuery doesn't like copy and pasting that one. I'm gonna leave this all in just for you all to see what happens when things go wrong. I may make the video a little bit longer, but it's also worth seeing your professor screw up, right? But what you see here is that we ran some jobs on BigQuery, took 1 second to query the entire US zip code database and join it on our little, ham-fisted transactional data that we created. And now what you have here as well at the bottom, so there is a nicely commented SQL statement as well to learn like what this query is actually doing. But consider that what we just did was we created a data set, we populated it with data, and then we kind of cross-queried it with a public data set of zip codes. And again, if you, we didn't really look at it in too much detail, but this customer transactions, we had a zip code field, and then we had an amount, right? So this is a transaction by location. We just cross-queried cross-referenced somebody's purchase with their zip code and then linked that up to a public database. Again, probably a simple SQL join, but now it's on a massive BigQuery scale. It only took 1 second to run. Take this and scale it up to, hey, I have to search through, again, zettabytes of data. This query would still run pretty quickly, which is pretty cool about BigQuery. So last but not least, probably the most important part, outside of seeing me screw up, we need to get rid of this, right? Like I said, every time you're doing something in Google Cloud or any cloud provider, make sure you clean up when you're done. You don't want this data set laying around if it's large, consuming storage resources, right? Typically, a data set like this would be a lot more massive, and it's taking up a lot of space, and that you're being charged for that space. So let's get rid of it. Here, cleanup. So BQ, RM, recursive. So let's get rid of our data set. Are you sure? Yes. So one thing here too, if you're not familiar with the Linux, you're going to get, if you get a choice like this, and it's kind of nice that they're giving you a choice and not just doing it automatically, the capitalized letter is going to be the default. So if I just hit enter without putting anything in, it would say no. I'm going to type in Y and then hit enter, and now my CodeLab is gone. Or sorry, my data set is gone. The CSV is still here, right? Because we didn't get rid of it. If I wanted to do that, RM for remove customer transactions.csv, enter. And now that is gone as well. Okay, a little bit longer of a video, but I think it's kind of important to see what happens when things go wrong. So if you have any questions on this one, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, good luck, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.